some studies are showing all 4 are impacted, and some studies are showing more impact on one area than another. But I can assure you that all of the research at some level is saying cognitive function is impacted by poor quality and low quantity sleep. So what happens if you can't breathe? Are you solving problems using your verbal and your nonverbal cognitive function? Are you attending, encoding, storing, reorganizing, and repeating back information? And are you working in an accurate and efficient manner? Nope. And when we bring this together, what do we find? And so this slide could have probably stretched down to here, but I was only given 45 minutes, and again, I didn't want to make anyone in this room a homicidal maniac, and so we're doing like a lot of highlights, lowlights today. So across several measures of cognitive function compared to their typically developing peers, individuals with sleep-disordered breathing earned scores that were significantly lower. Individuals with the most severe airway issues demonstrated profound disruption in their verbal cognitive ability. And why is that? We use verbal cognitive ability to do everything. If you find me a school that does a multisensory or a nonverbal curriculum in a way that is effective, I will bring you to an Eskimo in the North Pole and we will sell you some ice, okay? And that is the brass tacks of it. So we're using verbal cognition to socialize, to learn, and to be vocationally successful. Neurocognition is often incorrectly or thought of as it only means executive function, but it doesn't. When we're thinking about neurocognition, we're thinking about attention and executive functioning. We're thinking about visual spatial, visual motor, and the fine motor integration of all of that. We're thinking about language, receptive language, expressive language, ancillary language. And we're thinking about how we learn. And that has to include memory. So to learn, we have to pay attention to the information. The information has to go in and we have to understand it, okay? It needs to be stored in our brains and it just can't stay there. When we need to draw that information forward, okay, we have to retrieve it and we need to do it efficiently. If the teacher asks us a question, who ran for president in 2016, she does not or he does not want an answer 25 minutes later. So sleep and neurocognitive function. If you're getting limited quantity and or poor quality of sleep, are you remaining focused? Are you inhibiting your automatic responses? Are you tuning out distractions? Are you effectively and efficiently working? And then are you articulating your solutions clearly? And that's all while you're solving a multi-step instruction or problem. Again, you're not. So if we're thinking about neurocognition, namely executive function in brief, think of PASS. This is something from Jack Naglieri. P is for planning. You're thinking about thinking, and you're thinking about your actions and what you're going to do, what you decide to do, so like something comes of it, so it's effective. A is for attention, and attention doesn't mean I'm just paying attention in this moment. Attention means that I have selective attention to my speaking and not whatever's going on over here. Or I have sustained attention when my 3-year-old is telling me a ridiculous story about something that has gone on in her classroom. And she starts with, Mommy, I have to tell you something. I really have to tell you something. Mommy, I want to tell you something. And it happened in school today. In school today, something happened, and I have to tell you something. And I have to stick with it, right? So she feels loved, and she's reminded that she's loved and valued, and she's contributing. The first S in PASS is for simultaneous processing. And I often make the analogy of it's like baking a cake. So when we bake a cake, we have to do certain things that come all together. Okay, so we need simultaneous processing. We need to mix all the dry ingredients together. Simultaneous processing is really about getting the big picture. And then there's successive processing, and I'll bring us back to the cake example. I can't mix like the eggs and the icing together at the same time because that's gross, right? So we have to follow a sequence, and not just any sequence. We have to follow a sequence for the task that we're doing right now. I can't follow a sequence for driving when I'm writing out my holiday cards. Right? So sleep and neurocognition. What do we find? What are the heaviest hitters? Again, I don't have everything here because like the slides, it would look like we did this in like 7-point font. So we have attention dysfunction, global executive dysfunction, poor memory, disruptions with encoding, language issues, sluggish cognitive tempo, which is mental confusion, slow behaving, slow thinking, and slow to reach into your brain, get that piece of information it's stored there, but you access it and then you tell me in a timely manner. Visual spatial difficulties, difficulties with information integration, and planning and organizational weaknesses. The relationship between poor sleep quality and neurocognitive function is established. And this is largely happening, it's happening throughout the brain, but is largely happening in the prefrontal cortex, which is linked to all sorts of cognitive activities. It is often the #1 culprit blamed for ADHD, but it also includes things like creativity. And so it's not, oh, if I get 3 hours of sleep, I'll do something creative tomorrow. Because you would have been likely more creative if you had quality and quantity sleep. So if we're thinking about airway and neurocognitive function, right? Are you remaining focused? Are you doing all of these things? Do you tune out your distractions? Are you solving multi-step problems? P.S., you're not. Limited oxygen is associated with global neurocognitive function, namely attention dysfunction, global executive dysfunction, inhibition, task initiation, so to even get something organized, you have to white knuckle it through. Cognitive inflexibility, difficulties with abstract thinking, difficulties with cognitive and neurocognitive fluency. You have poor wisdom and knowledge because even if the information went in, you're struggling with digging it out. We see impaired language, so even if you do not have, or the individual does not have a diagnosable language disorder, compared to where this individual's potential should be, the person is missing the mark. We have fine motor dysfunction, and then we have an assortment of learning and memory problems. And now I would like to welcome the star of our show. It's not Sydney. It's the brain and the nervous system. Sydney is the star of our show, just not this slide. So, what happens when we actually look at the brain? So I put all of my testing toys away, okay, and I slide somebody into an fMRI machine, or we set somebody up with a neurologist and we do a PET scan, or we do a regular MRI. What happens? From sleep studies in which participants had concurrent airway challenges, the cerebral data revealed the presence of gray matter loss in the frontal lobes, in the temporal parietal occipital cortices, in the thalamus, in the hippocampal region, in some of the basal ganglia, and in the cerebellar regions. In addition to loss, atrophy, the brain is atrophying. In addition to those losses, there was decreased brain metabolism in the middle and posterior cingulate gyrus, in the parietal occipital cortex, and, of course, in the prefrontal cortex. So when we're thinking about children, what does this mean? So I have very, very distinct traumatic memories from my first Columbia residency and fellowship, in which my attending beat it into our group, saying the earlier damage happens in neuronal development, the more diffuse, the more severe, the more chronic, and the more the impairment is going to impact this child for life. In the same way, she would say, the earlier we get this child's services, the more we can serve this child and push this human to reach his or her cognitive potential. Intermittent hypoxia during critical periods of development may not only cause earlier cellular loss in the actual brain, it also might modify subsequent brain development. Hypoxia induces a process in which nitric oxide gene activity, okay, and then there's the formation of free radicals, and I hope this sounds scary because it is. It induces neuronal cell damage. And then what happens with the next layer? When I peel off the next layer of that onion, the intermittent hypoxia is also linked to the activation of pro-inflammatory pathways that either by themselves or through another reactive oxygenation process lead to premature death and cell loss.